This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
It's really lovely. Like everything that we do, we try to keep within a 100-kilometre footprint of where we are here. You know, pigs are born here, they're raised here, they're personally taken down on the back of a ute with some bedding. The big thing for us, because again, we're small and it's not too far away, we can take them down late in the afternoon and they're processed within 12 hours.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Many pig farmers are second or third generation. Some get into it to be on the land and others because they love pigs. But for Helen Jones and her husband Grant from Happy Pig Farm, it was a happy accident. Helen, how are you?
Yeah, well, yourself?
I'm good. It's one of the oddest ways to start a pig farm that I've heard is by accident. How did you find yourself to become a pig farmer?
Oh, I sometimes question that myself, you know, sometimes how do we end up pig farmers? Look, I think we always had an affiliation. I grew up in Sydney, but always had an affiliation to the bush. My dad was born in Wellington, up near Dubbo. So while raised in Sydney, you know, spent most of our holidays back with the family at Wello, as they affectionately call it. So we always loved it. So once we had the kids, we sort of had the chance to purchase this farm in O'Connell. It's a great little farm called Wanera, and it's just outside of Bathurst. And the original plan was we'd come up for a year and we'd head back to Sydney. You know, we just sort of keep it as a lifestyle block. But I suppose we dabbled in always having our own animals. We're mainly prime lamb producers to start with, and we still do have, you know, about 1,000 ewes at the moment. So we turn off, you know, quite a few lambs. And so we always dabbled in things, and Grant's always just done home slaughters for our own meat. And so we had a couple of piglets for our own personal consumption. But I've got to tell you, I never wanted pigs. You know, they kill your fences. Containing pigs is near impossible. They're so clever. But anyway, one day I'm at my kinesiologist appointment, and she mentioned she had a client that could no longer look after her pigs and would be interested in having them. And I said no, and Grant said yes. So needless to say, it was about a week later. I thought we'd actually agreed on no, but about a week later, this lady shows up with 4 sows and a boar, and I thought, oh gosh, here we go. You know, anyway, they were gorgeous. They were Berkshires, and so these gorgeous looking black girls came along, and we had one juvenile boar, and we affectionately named him Sock, being an acronym for Son of Champion, because we found out his father had been a Sydney Royal Champion Berkshire. So I thought, oh, that's
wow.
I know, we inherited Sock, and he's still going, old Sock. He doesn't sort of hang with the ladies as much anymore, but he's a gorgeous big boy. Let me tell you, there's some funny stories with him. But anyway, so Sock grew up, and I suppose he did what all good boars do. And the next thing you know, we're having piglets, and, you know, 1 litre can be up to 17 piglets. And so what, you know, quickly turned from 4 sows, you know, 30, 40, 50 piglets. And, you know, while Grant was good, you know, initially just processing them on farm and giving them to family and friends, it soon became obvious, you know, we had to look at some other commercial way either to sell them or rehome some of the sows. It was just becoming a bit over the top. And as you can imagine at the time, the farm really wasn't fenced for pigs, and they were literally free-ranging. And, you know, we've got one little bit of nice, you know, on a farm you often got your paddocks, and when drought they'll go brown, but one little bit of grass out the front that I just love. And I remember coming home from work one day and the pigs had got out and they just ripped up every bit of turf and every bit of garden that we had. And I was like, that's it, I'm going to shoot a lot of them, you know. And so it sort of just began with this sort of natural progression of what we were going to do. And we're in this small little community, and they have a festival down at the pub once a year, and someone said, oh, do you want to come down and, you know, sell some of your pork? Maybe you can do some pork rolls. And I thought, well, that'd be good. And we're sitting at home, and I suppose it's become more and more consciously, you know, the main priority for us is animal welfare and how they're treated. And pigs, you know, can get the raw end of intensive farming to a certain point. And I remember sitting outside actually with Sock, and he was in this big trough of water, and still got the photo, and I said, God, he just looks happy, and the next thing you know, Happy Pig was born, and that was about 4 years ago.
Wow.
So we're accidental farmers, pig farmers. Let me tell you, it was not intentional.
Well, you're producing amazing pork. Tell us a little bit about where you are and what's great for the environment. Great about the environment you're in for pig farming.
Yeah, I think. Well, we're just outside of Bathurst, so it's sort of granite country that we've got, and the pigs live what we believe is the most natural sort of environment we've got. So I think what's gorgeous is how harmonious it actually has all worked. So as I said, we mainly focus on lambs, but the pigs actually can be quite complementary to that process. So we have a focus, in looking at regenerative agricultural practices. Excuse me. And so often we will rotate stock around and we'll rest paddocks in between. And pigs do an amazing thing. They naturally dig. So, they can go in after we've had like a winter cereal crop in, and the pigs will come in, they eat up, all the goodness that's left, turn over the soil, and we'll just leave it there, for a couple of months before something else happens in that particular paddock. So, yeah, they're quite complementary in that process. We've always been lucky. I still teach full-time off farm. Grant historically has always been on farms. He used to manage rural properties, so it's sort of a natural progression across into it, looking after our own animals. But it's been interesting.
Well, what's the transition been like for you? You mentioned you grew up in Sydney, in Ashfield, but living in the country and living that life and working with animals, what surprised you about it?
I think it's a lot harder than I thought it would be. It's one of those things that it's constant, and I think you have a greater appreciation while you sort of, if you're in Sydney and you go to buy something, it's quite convenient, but there's a lot of labour of love that's probably gone into that before that product gets there. And I think one of the hardest things initially for me was, I've got this great old farmer up the road, and he said to me, because Grant would be away for work a bit, and I'd come and a lamb would be down or something would be sick and something would die, and I'd be in tears, and old Ed up the road would say, Helen, where there's livestock, there's dead stock. And it'd be like, okay, this is a natural part of what you've got to go through. And I think the hardest thing, I was looking at, growing animals for human consumption is sometimes confronting, do you get attached? I think was one of the thoughts before. And when I think of that, it's funny, when I first moved up here, I could not eat any of our animals. We sold them and I would buy meat in. But I've got to be honest, now I've gone completely full circle and we only eat our meat. And so much so when we go out, I only eat fish or vegetarian. So I suppose, like many people have said, they sort of, something has to die for something to actually be on that plate, in essence of what it is. And for me, I'd much prefer to eat what I've known, how the animal's lived, how it's been treated, that nothing's been added into that system of that animal, is something that actually, I literally only eat our meat as we go through. So it's sort of like the full circle, isn't it? Like, and a big part of what we do, I guess, and we're only really small. We're not intensive at all. But I think a big part of, we've got a growing change in consumer behaviours and patterns where they actually are really more conscious of wanting to know where their food comes from and how the animal's been treated. And I think part of that mission is to educate people, on their choice. If they choose to eat meat, it's important that maybe they, understand where their meat comes from and the process that's actually involved. So this sort of, I think more people are much more informed now. There's not the naivety perhaps that was in the past, or I suppose that's the whole technology. You can access and Google anything and find out what's going on. But it's really important to know where it comes from, how they're farmed.
You mentioned the welfare and the importance of it for the pigs, and you also mentioned Sock and that photo that you have of him in water. Tell us about what's life like on the farm for the pigs?
Yeah, I'd like to say they live a good life. I think the whole point, happy pigs, definitely, they live a carefree and very relaxed life. They're very much used to us and the other animals around them, so they do coexist, with horses and sheep and a few cattle and bits and pieces, and a couple of dash hounds that run and ramp through the paddocks and everything else, and they're really quite chilled with all of that. So what I do love is that they live pretty much in nature as they would be doing. So they're in huge big paddocks. We've got a few shelters in paddocks that aren't as treed and as other ones. But, it's interesting. You can build all that infrastructure for them. And what I really love is that when they do farrow or, have their babies, they can do that in whatever environment they feel safest to do so. So when we have our sows coming on, we've only got about 16, I think 15, 16 sows at the moment. But when they come to farrowing, they move sort of into our maternity wing, like a farrowing paddock that we've got. There's only a couple of them ever in because they get a bit territorial when they're having their babies. But we've got these great little humpy shelters that they can go into. But, we've got this one pig, Michelle, and she will not farrow down in a shelter. And, we'll have straw or bedding in there, but for whatever reason, she feels safest. She heads up we've got this big tree line. And we just know when she's gone missing, we go, okay, she must be close to farrowing. And sure enough, she'll be up in those trees and she'll stay there. She'll farrow down there and she's really relaxed. We can go up to her and how you going? Yep. And, pumps out the little piglets. And then at about day 2, 3, she's like, okay, I'm ready now. Bring them back down into the paddock. And that's just for me, and I think for all, to know that your pigs are living that sort of life is really, and that often translates into the product that we actually have. You've got these relaxed animals.
I love how you sort of talked about the attachment to the animals and how you've gone full circle to only eating your own meat produced on the farm now. You mentioned you've got some stories about Sock, and you also mentioned Michelle as well. Tell us some stories about some of the pigs and what they get up to.
Well, we generally try not to, as we've got a few more, we generally don't name as many as we did, but we do actually have this amazing little girl called Maggie. And she was a potty pig, and often I don't get involved in when they're farrowing if there is a run to the litter. You just let nature take its course. And, of course, because they're not in crates, it does unfortunately, sometimes they do roll and crush a piglet. And I sometimes think that maybe it's nature why they have so many because, they'll always lose a couple in that sort of scenario. But, look, we had little Maggie and she's a classic. Maggie and Katie, actually. At first I was bad at sexing and I thought Katie was a Kevin Bacon, but it turns out it was Katie. But anyway, Katie's gone on and Maggie, for whatever reason, she's just stayed incredibly friendly and she was tiny. Like she was in a beanie, the size of a beanie. I didn't think she was going to make it. And I have a dash hound, Peanut, and he is the most maternal thing I've ever known. And Maggie was for the first 2 weeks of her life in front of the fire in the house, and then she progressively moved outside. And she's in the paddocks now with the other ladies and bits and pieces, but she was joined for the first time. We held her off until a little bit later in life, and she was joined, and she's only just farrowed and had her piglets about 6 weeks ago, her first ever litter. And when she was due to farrow, she's up in the back paddock, which is about 1 kilometre from the house. And she's pushed through every fence to come home to farrow in the backyard. I know. It was just, and then it was very cute for about a day until they started going everywhere again. It's like, God, get her out of the yard, get her out. But, and that's just, to me, when they do farrow, they want to be somewhere safe. And being her first time, she brought herself home, which I always thought was pretty lovely. But anyway, that's Maggie.
You mentioned Sock, the son of a champion. Do you have a story you can share about him?
Oh, other than he's just a likable rogue. He I think he's fussy on the ladies. You think like any sort of particular, but he actually has a couple of favourites. He had Serena and Nellie were his 2 favourite ladies. So he's retired now, but any chance, and that's what's been gorgeous is that with the troughs and water, when it warms up, like now, for example, we're filling natural wallows in the paddocks. But whenever he'd break out at home, you just find him in a big horse trough. In the yard, mind you, with the stallion is the boar in the stallion's water. I'm going, both are pretty relaxed at that particular point in time. He's a funny one. But he's been replaced now with Paulie because, it's really hard. Berkshire, the actual genetics of pigs in Australia, it's quite a closed market. You can't bring genetics of pigs in. So you've got to be really careful, I suppose, about inbreeding and just making sure your lines are correct. So it's really hard to build numbers organically with Berkshires. So that's been a learning curve for us, part and parcel.
Tell us a little bit about, the feed and what they're eating. And has that changed as you brought sort of the meat to market and built the farm up?
Yeah, it definitely has. I think diet for the pig is a big part of it. So these guys are pretty much pasture raised. We call it with grain assist. So initially when we got the pigs, they were just running around eating grass, and we were happy with that. But to get consistency in the product, you realise you do need to add a little bit more to it. So they start with that. Every second day they get like a combo mix of a cereal grain just in a feeder. But we actually, from a sustainability point of view, have relationships with local businesses. So these guys receive fresh fruit and vegetables and bread and spent grain from a local brewery. So we do that. We basically go and collect that food Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So we have a relationship with Woolworths in town, and we're talking every sort of second day we might get about 10 wheelie bins of fresh fruit and vegetables that's just sort of past its use by date and not fit for human consumption. Yeah, they love it, especially watermelon. I think watermelon would have to be their favourite. Oh. They're not too good on the citrus. That we often will just pull the lemons out and I keep them separate for us, like put them to the side. But they absolutely love the fresh fruit and veggies and the bread. So anything, again, that's not fit for human consumption, because they do a really good job, I think, with Oz Harvest. Some of that food will go to people, and then anything that's not quite, we go in and we pick that up. So they feed naturally in pasture, a bit of grain assist, and then 3 days a week they're getting fresh fruit and veggies and some bread. We also have an amazing brewery in town called Reckless Brewing, and we go in there twice a week and they get the spent hops and the grain from them. So it's got a little bit of nutrition in it. It's more like a gut filler to some extent, but it does definitely have a level of protein. And the other that they really love, we've got an artisan cheesemaker, and we occasionally go up to her and pick up the whey as a byproduct.
Wow.
I know they love that. They absolutely. It's like 14% protein. It's like ice cream on the hips. It just sticks. It just they really do. They love. They've got this little containers, little suckling things. They just come up and have a suckle of their little milkshake. So it's really lovely. Like everything that we do, we try to keep within a 100-kilometre footprint of where we are here. So, pigs are born here, they're raised here, and this is the other thing I think that really makes a difference to how I suppose we work with our pigs. Because we're only small, we have the luxury of not having to put them on big trucks to take them down to the abattoirs, and that's just the nature of the beast, how it is to commercially sell. They have to go to the abattoirs. So they're personally taken down on the back of a ute with some bedding. And the big thing for us, because, again, we're small and it's not too far away, we can take them down late in the afternoon and they're processed within 12 hours. So they're not standing there for a long time stressing and worrying. So to me, that's a big part, again, in that full cycle, just looking after them, because they're amazingly smart animals. You can't put past, I think, the intelligence of pigs. They're very special animals.
All of this that you do and the world that you create for them, what's the end result? How do you describe the meat that you get from these pigs that live this idyllic life?
Look, I think it definitely flows through. You can definitely tell the difference in the tenderness, and I think flavour is a big part of what we do. And that's the big thing, is at that point of difference. First of all, I think we start with a quality product, and that's being a Berkshire pig. It's a totally different animal to your white commercial pigs. They take longer to grow, so they're a slower growing pig to start with. And, most people would understand that with that comes this amazing sort of marbling through the meat and a really lovely fat cover. And that fat is so white. It's a really nice fat. We actually render that fat down and use that fat and sell the lard. Yeah, it's amazing what you can do with pig lard in itself as a byproduct. But it's really about just having that point of difference. And with them being the diet directly impacts the moisture, I think, and the flavour in the meat. And we've definitely refined the feeding program to improve that fat content ratio and the flavour of the meat. And, pigs are an amazingly infusible meat. You look at that Iberico ham that they've got like finished on the acorns, they're black pigs. That has that sort of nutty flavour. And we recently we're pretty lucky where we are. Our property neighbours a good mate next door, Carmine, and his Fish River truffles. And our back neighbour backs onto Renzaglia wines. And yeah, it really look. Let me tell you, in lockdowns, we may not have toilet paper, but we had truffles, wine, and pork. So we were okay in lockdowns. We only ever had a couple, but we were actually okay in that sort of scenario. But we actually just had a festival. There's a second one it was last weekend. La Vendimia de la Porchetta, which is roughly translates to Festival of the Pig up the road. And with that, we had two products. One was Grant made these amazing pork and truffle sausages, which they were served, and that was just truffle and pork just seemed to work pretty well together. And then what we did have was we had a pig that Sam Renzaglia, was bringing down for 6 weeks that we hand-fed grapes to for the last 6 weeks of its life. Yeah, we affectionately named her Clarissa. Anyway, she was turned into salami for the festival, and we made a few different pigs and different salamis and copagolo and different meats. And you could see, not just in the colour, but the taste, like this total sort of tangy, it was just amazing to see what the difference, the finishing of the feed of one pig versus the other pigs. And that was literally a grape-infused pig.
Wow, that sounds extraordinary.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun, actually. That was pretty cool.
You mentioned that it's still sort of small-scale farming, but what are your markets? Where are you selling the pork?
We just go to Bathurst farmers markets, so that's once a month, the fourth weekend of the month. And then the next day after that, there's another smaller market at Tarrana, which is sort of on its way to Lithgow, between Bathurst and Lithgow. And we just head down to that. So we were going up to Orange the alternate weeks, but we've actually just scaled that back because, look, our local support's pretty strong and we just want to keep it as local and as least sort of transport as possible. And we find that a lot of people actually will come down to us now. It's taken a while to build that clientele, but it definitely is. And so we feel very blessed to be supported by our local community and, have taken us in and are very loyal to us. So we have regular clients that all got, we have little combo packs or bits and pieces that you can have. Sometimes we add some lamb in with it as well. And having that relationship has been, I suppose, probably one of the most rewarding parts of what we do, building with the people around us.
You mentioned that you only consume the meat that's produced on your own farm. Who's the cook in the house and what's the family signature pork dish? Can you take us through it?
I'd say we're a combo of cooks. I think it comes down to who's really inspired on the day to do what. But look, we definitely, when we have markets, when we do the process, we process once a fortnight. So once for the markets at the end of the month and then just for direct consumer sales, like from the farm on the alternate week. And whenever we do that, Grant makes pork schnitzel. And I know it seems really simple and maybe not as much crackle as you might be thinking, but he makes this amazing schnitzel. And generally we have that every second Friday night because it's fresh, literally straight out of what he's been preparing for the markets. And we just get a really nice salted Turkish bread. You get some Kewpie mayo and some rocket, and you add that shallow fried schnitzel. And honestly, you could think you're at the best pub in Australia. It's just... It really is a sort of go-to meal on a Friday. And then what I love to cook occasionally is I love a good pork, like pulled pork. So if you take the whole Scotch fillet and often just sort of pan seal that first, and if you just make like a spice rub, often with just like onion, garlic powder and some thyme, paprika, and then I cook that in the slow cooker with like a bit of honey and butter. And when that sort of falls apart after about 5 hours, serve that over like a lentil and cauliflower pilaf. I've got to say that goes down a bit of a treat.
You mentioned that you didn't want to be a pig farmer, and Grant did. But obviously, 4 years later, that's what you're doing. How do you feel about it now? Have they changed your mind?
Oh, there's days. No. I actually really enjoy it, and it's a lot of work sometimes. Even though we're not large scale, it is pretty much on every day. You have to do something with the pigs. So whether it's collecting the food from all those local businesses, like I mentioned before, or if it's simple things like just making sure the water is flowing correctly and that you've got clean water, especially coming into summer, making sure their wallows are filled up. When you've got the time to sit back and actually look at what you've achieved, it's actually been a great journey. And I don't think we'll be stopping anytime soon. It's sort of a hard question, like where do you go with it next? But I think we'll just stay the sort of scale that we are. We haven't quite hit the best economies of scale, if that makes sense, but it's more a passion. And, it's a side hustle that's become bigger than a side hustle, but it's complementary to the full-time farming with the lamb. So, yeah, no, we'll just keep growing it, I think, at this stage.
The move to O'Connell was only meant to be temporary, and that here you are living out there. How has that move and the creation of the pig farm, how's it changed you?
I think it's been an amazing personal journey. You're actually right. I never thought about it like that. It's look, first of all, moving to O'Connell was always beautiful. It is about the people and it's the lifestyle and it's about making a difference. And you actually feel you have that moment to do so. And look, don't get me wrong. I love Sydney. I love the hustle and bustle of it and I love the convenience of things. But the pace of life probably now I would probably struggle to go back to. It's just the everyday little simplicity of things, when you can walk down in the afternoon and I can look up the back paddock and the pigs are all doing their things. They're enjoying that nice sort of sunset. You might have a nice glass of wine from your neighbour across the back fences, giving you a nice bottle. And it's just a simplicity. And I think there's an appreciation in that. If you can learn to I've definitely learned to calm down and to move at a slower pace. And I tell you what I actually have learned is not to be so controlling. And I know that sounds terrible, but I can't control the weather. I can't control a lot of things in farming. You can only do what you can do. And that was really hard initially to think especially that last drought that we went through, that was pretty confronting. That was tough. And that's where the things like, being able to access the food, to be able to go pick up the scraps, that was a lifesaver to get us through. So I definitely have a greater sense of appreciation for the little things. I've calmed down and I've learned I can't control everything. So I've just got to go with the flow a little bit more. So if you can live a bit more like a pig, take it easy, stroll around, wallow in some water. No, it's all good.
You mentioned how hard it is to work on the farm, but what do you love about pig farming?
I think I like the fact that the end result, what you actually see, the fruits of your labour. It's definitely something like we didn't actually think about that we'd be in a food industry, if that makes sense. Like we've always loved food and really enjoyed growing up and sharing it. But I guess we never thought we'd end up expanding into it by default. And it's funny, I don't think of ourselves in the food industry, if that makes sense. I just think we sort of sell pigs. But I think what's been lovely is being able to share that with people. And we have made the most amazing friends along the way. And by default, we're on the pseudo fringe of a foodie industry that we didn't realise we'd fit into, but we've become a part of. And, that's been really lovely.
Well, Helen, it's been an absolute joy to have you on the Crackling today, to hear just a part of your story. Look forward to catching up again and hearing much more of it. So please stay in touch.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks for having me. It's been wonderful.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.